They say the devil wears Prada. Ours wears a beige pantsuit, with a homeowner association pin and enough perfume to knock out a horse. She rolled up in her little hybrid sedan, like she owned the county, flanked by a sweating 20-something HOA rent-a-cop in an ill-fitting tactical vest. It was 6:13 p.m., the sun bleeding gold across the gravel driveway where I'd just parked our old Silverado, dust still curling up from the tires. My wife stepped out of the passenger side, boots crunching, hand already reaching for her coffee thermos when we heard the screech. "Ma'am, you are in violation of Section 3. This is private access." Karen's voice cracked like a whip. I turned, half expecting a snake. Instead, I got her, round face red with self-importance. Clipboard in one hand, phone in the other, already dialing. Behind her, the fake cop was reaching for something on his belt. Not a gun, thank God. Zip ties. My wife didn't flinch. Just raised one brow. Her badge glinted as she opened her jacket and let it hang on her belt. She said nothing. Didn't have to. Karen marched forward like a crusader. "This is a community violation. Your vehicle is blocking regulated access. As head of the homeowner association, you're on our land," I said, stepping between them. "This driveway's been here since '79. Not anymore," she snapped. "This area was reassigned as part of the subdivision's right-of-way." She actually tried to wave over her little rent-a-thug. "Detain her." That's when my wife pulled out her badge. Sheriff's Star, issued by the county, shiny, heavy, real. "You sure about that?" she asked, calm as a frozen lake. The rent-a-cop hesitated like a man standing on a mine. Karen froze mid-step, lips twitching. That badge is not real," she hissed. "Anyone can buy those online. So can lawsuits," I muttered. That shut her up. For now. She turned with a huff, muttering into her phone. Her goon followed, confused and fidgety. I watched them drive off, the HOA logo on her back window, catching the last of the sunset like a target. That night, my wife didn't eat much. Just stared at the wall. That wasn't like her. She dealt with drunk ex-cons, meth heads with rifles, even a guy who tried to bite her once during booking. But something about that encounter, it clung to her. Maybe because it didn't feel like a threat. It felt like erosion, slow, sanctioned, and wearing a smile. Next morning, the letter came. Registered. Neatly typed. The kind of official cruelty that only comes from bored people with too much power. According to the homeowner association, the access road to our ranch had been retroactively designated part of the subdivision infrastructure. Use of it was now subject to community review. Until then, suspended. They cut off our only driveway. I stood there holding that paper, smelling the burnt coffee my wife left on too long, feeling something ancient stir inside me. Not rage, exactly. Older than that. Like when you hear wolves too close to campfire light. You don't get angry, you get ready. My wife didn't say a word. She just walked past me, holstered her badge, and went out to the fence line with the dog. Watching. Waiting. That afternoon, the signs went up. HOA branded metal plates drilled into our trees. Temporary access suspended. Violation will result in penalty. Like we were trespassers on our own dirt. The audacity was stunning. But it wasn't until the second night that it really hit home. We came back from town, and there it was, spray painted in red across our front gate. Get out. I smelled gasoline. Not much. Just enough. Someone had dumped a can near the barn. Nothing ignited, thank the Lord, but that wasn't the point. It wasn't about burning us out. It was about warning. My wife called it in. Procedural and cold. Voice tight. Then she hung up, sat on the porch, and stared out over the field like she was back in Iraq counting shadows. And me? I started digging. Not in the dirt. In the records. County files. Subdivision permits. Archived deeds. Karen might think she buried the past under red tape, but this ranch had roots deeper than her HOA bylaws. I wasn't going to yell. Wasn't going to protest. I was going to pull every nail from the coffin she tried to build for us, until her whole paper empire crumbled in her hands. But first, I needed to know how deep the rot went. What I found made my stomach twist. The land our driveway ran through, sold 3 months ago, quietly. No listing, no announcement, just a transfer of title to a shell company with an address that traced back to an office suite, rented by the homeowner association. Karen didn't just want power. She bought the battlefield. The thing about digging is, you never know what you'll find, or what it'll cost you. I stayed up past 2 that night, flicking through digitized land records and tax filings. Pages glowed on the screen like ghosts, each one whispering something ugly. I traced the shell company through 2 more layers. All roads led back to the homeowner association's legal counsel, a slick firm that bragged about strategic property repositioning. I wasn't naive. This wasn't about a driveway. It was a land grab, slow and deliberate. Our ranch sat just beyond the subdivision limits, but it touched their private greenbelt. Karen wanted control, not just of lawns and mailboxes, but of every inch her eyes could reach. Next morning, I drove into town. County Records Office. The woman behind the counter, Marlene, knew me from way back. I asked for the original 1979 easement agreement, the one my grandfather signed with the state. She hesitated, said she'd need a few days. I leaned in and said, "I'll wait." 2 hours later, she brought it out. Yellowed edges, faded signatures, but clear as day. Our driveway had been designated as a conditional access corridor for emergency services. Grandfathered in, not subject to subdivision regulation. But here's the kicker. It could be contested, but only if the land changed hands, which Karen made sure of. That night, my wife and I sat at the kitchen table, the document spread between us. She stared at it, jaw tight. So they bought the road out from under us. Not just bought it, I said. They weaponized it. She didn't speak after that. Just walked out to the barn, dog trailing behind. I heard the door slam. Then silence. The next attack came at dawn. I woke up to the sound of barking. Loud. Urgent. Our dog never barked like that unless something was wrong. I grabbed the shotgun, unloaded, always, and stepped out barefoot. There they were. 3 men in reflective vests and HOA caps, hauling plastic barriers off the back of a pickup. They started lining them up across our driveway, like we were about to host a marathon. I didn't yell, didn't threaten. I just stepped into the gravel and stood there, arms crossed. Sai-Chi, one of them looked at me and said, "Safety protocol, sir. Restricted access until further notice." "This isn't your land," I said. He shrugged. Talk to the association. I wanted to punch something. Instead, I waited until they left. Took pictures of every plate, every vest, every tag on the truck. My wife stood beside me, silent. Her badge gleamed in the morning sun, but she didn't reach for it. She knew the rules better than anyone. Abuse that badge, and they'd spin it into a scandal before sundown. But Karen didn't stop there. By Thursday, the power company showed up. Said they received a request from the homeowner association to inspect our shared transformer. There was no such thing, of course, but the lineman looked uncomfortable. Said he had to follow the work order. We stalled them. Barely. That night, my wife sat in the dark, porch light flickering overhead. I asked if she was okay. She just nodded, but I saw her grip her coffee mug tighter than usual, like it was the only thing keeping her from falling apart. Yet, they're coming at us sideways, I said. Not with guns, with paperwork and gaslighting. She looked up, eyes sharp now. Then we fight the same way. I smiled. That's the woman I married. We spent the next 2 days making calls. Quiet ones, to old friends, a former surveyor, a retired code enforcement officer, people who still remembered when this county was just fields and fences. They couldn't break the HOA's reach, but they could point us in the right direction. Turns out, the land Karen acquired wasn't entirely hers. Part of it had been flagged in the 80s as a potential fire route easement. Still listed as conditional state property, overlooked in the rush to privatize. And that was leverage. But we had to be careful. Too aggressive, and they'd spin it. Paint us as unstable, dangerous, a sheriff gone rogue, a husband with a grudge. So we waited until the next move came, and it came hard. Saturday morning, we heard a knock. Not at the door, on the barn. My wife opened it and found 3 deputies. Not ours. Not her team. These were from the neighboring county. One of them handed her a notice. She was being placed under internal review for misuse of authority, pending investigation. Karen filed the complaint. Of course she did. I stepped forward, but they warned me to stay back. My wife didn't argue. Just nodded, handed over her service weapon, and walked to the cruiser without looking back. The sound of that door shutting was louder than any gunshot. And for the first time in a long time, I felt helpless. But not for long. I didn't sleep that night. Couldn't. Not with her side of the bed, empty and cold, like someone had scooped out part of my chest and left it hollow. The house creaked more than usual, like it felt the absence too. I kept hearing echoes. Boots on gravel, the slam of a cruiser door, her voice low and clipped when she handed over the badge. I paced. Drank bad coffee. Tried not to imagine her sitting under fluorescent lights while Karen spun her lies. The next morning, I drove to the neighboring county office, but they wouldn't let me see her. Said it was an active review, and all communication had to go through proper channels. The deputy on duty avoided my eyes when he told me that. Probably knew who she was. Probably felt ashamed. So, I drove home, with my fingers tapping the steering wheel like a woodpecker's curse. On the way, I passed the ranch entrance and slammed the brakes. The signs were gone. The ones Karen had put up. In their place was a fresh set of orange barricades and a new metal post. Access closed. Pending legal resolution. I laughed. Just a dry, cracked thing. that didn't feel human. She wasn't stopping. She was escalating, kicking a man while his wife was in review. And now the road wasn't just disputed, it was sealed. I pulled into the drive anyway, rolled over the gravel like it belonged to me, because it did. At the porch, I stopped. The dog came out, tail low, eyes wary, like he sensed something shifting in the air. I gave him a pat, then walked inside and opened the cabinet. Maps, old ones, rolled up, yellowing. County land use surveys from when I was still in high school. My granddad used to trace property lines with his knuckles while he smoked his pipe, muttering about the fools who think ink owns earth. One map showed the emergency corridor, a thin red line drawn back in '84. The line ran straight through our driveway and beyond, up into the hills, designated as contingent state easement, non-commercial. Karen's acquisition didn't remove it. She just assumed no one would look. I spent the next hour scanning every document I had, uploading copies, naming each file like I was building a case for war. Then I drove into town, not to the sheriff's office, to the Historical Society. Miss Lillian still ran it. 82 years old, steel hair, eyes like drill bits. She saw me walk in with a box under my arm and said, "Finally ready to stop grumbling and start burning things down?" I grinned. "Just the paper trail. For now." She let me into the back. We spent 4 hours comparing zoning changes, plat shifts, and permit overrides. At one point, she leaned back and said, "Son, this ain't just a mistake. This is orchestrated. She's consolidating influence. Karen? You're Karen." She spat like it was a bad taste. "She's got 3 parcels pending acquisition. 2 of them touch fire routes. She's trying to gate the whole damn ridge, one ranch at a time." I leaned over the table. "Can we prove that?" She nodded slowly. "Maybe, but proving it ain't the trick. Making people care is." That night, I sat alone on the porch, watching moths slam into the light bulb, like it owed them something. I thought about my wife, about how quiet she was that last night, eyes stormy with restraint. She wasn't the kind to break, but they weren't trying to break her. They were trying to stain her, make her wear the accusation like a scar. That's when I heard tires on gravel. I stood up, watched as a beat-up Ford rolled in, engine rattling like a cough. The man who stepped out was short, wide, and wearing the uniform of the local electric co-op. He looked around, then walked up like someone arriving at a funeral. "Mr. Lewis?" I nodded. He scratched the back of his neck. "Just thought you should know. They're asking questions. The association, about your transformer, about whether it counts as shared utility infrastructure." I stared at him. "They send you?" "No, they asked. I didn't answer. But I figured, you ought to know they're trying to build a case, slow and quiet." I nodded once. "Appreciate the warning." He tipped his hat and drove off. I watched the taillights fade into the dark. Then I walked inside, sat at the table, and did something I hadn't done in 20 years. I wrote a letter to the governor, not a plea, not a complaint, a reminder. Because our ranch wasn't just dirt and fences. It was part of the last standing corridor for wildfire evacuation in 3 counties. A corridor the state still technically owned. And Karen? She just tried to shut it down. Next morning, I mailed it. Certified. Return receipt. Then I picked up the phone and called my wife's old army friend. She always said he owed her a favor. Time to collect. The call to Marcus didn't go how I expected. He didn't say much at first, just listened. Let me run through the whole story. From the first spray-painted threat to the bogus review against my wife. When I finished, there was a pause on the line, like he was deciding whether to speak as a friend or as a soldier. Then he said, I remember her in Kandahar, cool under fire. Didn't blink when the RPG hit 20 feet out. If they're trying to smear her, they picked the wrong woman. I could hear a Zippo flick open. A long inhale. Then, I'll make a few calls. That was all I needed. By the following afternoon, a plain envelope showed up. No return address. Inside, a photocopy of a property overlay map, marked in red ink. The emergency corridor, ours, was circled with a handwritten note. State claim still active. Verify with code 217C. But the second page was the bombshell. A scanned memo from the Homeowner Association's legal team, dated 2 months prior, discussing a preemptive containment strategy for non-compliant outliers. Our name wasn't listed directly, but our parcel ID was, in bold. Karen wasn't just reacting. She was executing a long game. That night, I drove out to the north fence line. Just me, the stars, and the wind sliding over the grass like a whisper. I leaned against the post and tried to think it through. We had proof now, enough to at least stall her. Maybe more, but I didn't want a war of paper. I wanted her to feel what she'd done. To know that you can't build empires by trampling lives. The next morning, I got my chance. She showed up in person, pulled into our blocked-off drive, like she was royalty returning to her estate. Got out in a cream-colored blazer, sunglasses the size of saucers, and a smug little smile that made my knuckles twitch. Behind her, 2 men in suits. Not the usual HOA security. These were real estate sharks. I recognized one from a billboard in town. She marched right up to the edge of the gravel and said, loud enough for the birds to flinch, Mr. Lewis, under Article 6 of the Revised Community Alignment Agreement, you are now in breach of shared infrastructure compliance. We are prepared to offer you a buyout. I laughed. Actually laughed. Buyout? Lady, you're standing on state-designated evacuation land. You don't own a damn inch of this. Her smile tightened. We have documents that say otherwise. And I have a copy of your internal memo. That wiped the smirk clean off. The suits looked at her, confused. One asked, What memo? She recovered quickly, turned to them, and said, Baseless accusations. He's posturing. I leaned forward just enough to make her lean back. I'm tired of posturing. Next time you send a crew to install barriers, make sure they're not trespassing on sovereign land. Because next time, I'll film it. And I'll make damn sure the county commissioner sees it. She hesitated. For the first time, doubt flickered behind the lenses. That afternoon, someone tried to break into our barn. They didn't get far. The dog chased them off. But they left marks, scratched lock, scuffed boots in the dirt. A message carved into the wood panel near the door. Traitors. I didn't call the sheriff's office, not yet. I was saving that move. Instead, I went to the schoolhouse. Old, weathered place, turned into a community center 10 years ago. Miss Carla ran the books there. Retired teacher, sharp as a blade. She used to teach Karen's daughter. She also kept archives. I told her what was happening. She nodded once, disappeared into the back, and came out with a binder so thick it looked like it had its own zip code. HOA charters, all the revisions, including who signed what, when, and how they tried to sneak in new clauses. I flipped through the pages until I hit gold. Back in '96, the HOA had tried to annex adjacent properties into their control, illegally. The case had been dismissed, but not erased. It was still on record, buried in a box nobody looked at. Same playbook, different decade. I took photos, scanned pages, built my arsenal, and then I waited. Not long. 2 nights later, Karen made her mistake. She filed an injunction to freeze our utilities, citing excessive usage from unauthorized operations. The co-op flagged it, called me. I sent them the overlay, the fire corridor, the memo, the 1996 violation. Then I said, "You freeze my ranch, I go public with how you're letting private groups hijack state land." The line was quiet. Then, understood. That night, for the first time in a week, my wife called. She didn't say much. Just one sentence. "I think they're cracking." I grinned so wide it hurt, because cracks let the light in, and I was ready to tear the roof off. Cracks don't mean collapse. Not yet. But they do make the structure creak. And Karen's empire started creaking like a house in a high wind. 3 days passed after my wife's call. I didn't push for more. She needed space to breathe, to think. I knew that tone in her voice. Half steel, half scar. She was bracing for something. That meant I had to brace too. So, I kept building the pressure. Slow and quiet. Sent a certified letter to the county zoning board with my findings. Copied the State Department of Emergency Planning. Then I went local. Printed out flyers with the fire evacuation map overlay and posted them on the bulletin board at the feed store, the church, the diner. I didn't accuse. Just asked a question in bold letters. What happens when the road is blocked during the next fire? People started asking questions. Not directly to me, but I saw the looks, the whispers. That's how change starts in towns like ours. Not with shouting, with sideways glances. Then came the moment I'd been waiting for. A man in a dark green truck pulled into my drive. No logos, no sirens. But I recognized him. Hector Ramirez. State Land Compliance. Wore his badge like it weighed 100 pounds. He stepped out, looked around, then said, "Heard you've been stirring up some dust." "Karen's the one bulldozing boundaries," I said. He nodded. "Show me." We spent 2 hours walking the property line. I showed him the maps, the documents, the old fire posts still visible under brush. He didn't say much, just took notes. Before he left, he said, "This corridor wasn't supposed to be touched. If someone's reclassifying it, that's not just overreach. That's a violation. Will you act on it?" He gave me a long look. "Depends how loud it gets." That night, I lit the match. Not literally, but close enough. I invited 4 ranchers over for coffee. Old-timers. Men who didn't trust tech, but trusted land. I laid it all out. No drama. Just facts, maps, threats. The inch-by-inch creep of Karen's authority. When I finished, old Jim Keller leaned back in his chair and said, "She's trying to build a kingdom without asking who owns the bricks." By sunrise, the Whisper Network had teeth, but Karen wasn't done. The next blow came personal. My wife came home. She didn't knock, didn't call ahead, just walked through the door. Still in uniform, eyes bloodshot but locked in place. She set her badge and weapon on the table and said, "Suspension lifted. Complaint dropped. But I'm on thin ice." I stood, she walked into my arms, and didn't say a word for 3 full minutes. Then she whispered, "They tried to get me to resign." I held her tighter. "They can't win if you don't let go." I didn't. She didn't tell me what happened behind those closed doors. Didn't need to. Whatever Karen had spun didn't stick, but it left bruises. The next day, she joined me at the fence line, and together we planned our move. Not revenge. Precision. We waited until Sunday. Community picnic at the Ridge Park. Homeowner Association had a booth. Bragging about new improvements. I showed up with a simple binder. Handed it to one of the HOA board members. Inside. Documentation of the fire corridor, state overlays, the 1996 annexation attempt, and the redacted memo from their own legal team. I didn't raise my voice. Just said, "I thought you should know what you're standing on." They paled, all of them. Karen wasn't there. Of course not. She didn't like uncontrolled spaces, but the seed had been planted. The following week, the association held an emergency closed session. Rumors swirled about liability, about a potential state audit. A day later, 2 board members resigned. Karen made a statement. Temporary restructuring. But behind those words, I saw fear. And then, like clockwork, came the desperation play. One evening, a car pulled up. Black Lexus. Karen stepped out alone. No guards, no entourage. She walked up the drive like she hadn't declared war on our lives. "Mr. Lewis," she said, "we need to talk." I didn't offer her a seat. She looked me dead in the eye. "This has gone too far. You're destabilizing the community. People are panicking." "No," I said. "You're panicking." She stepped closer, voice low. "If this goes public, nobody wins. We can fix this. Quietly. Let us incorporate your property. You'll get security, infrastructure, influence." I stared at her for a long moment. Then I said, "You're offering me a throne in a house of ash." She blinked. You don't get it," I continued. "This ranch isn't leverage. It's legacy. You came after my wife, my home, my history. You don't fix that with handshakes." She tried to smile. "Be reasonable." I stepped forward, lowered my voice. "You should start packing, because this whole operation, it's about to catch fire, and this time, there's no corridor to run through." She left without another word. The next day, someone slashed our water line, and just like that, it became clear. Karen wasn't trying to win anymore. She was trying to scorch the earth before she lost. We were lucky. The cut water line didn't reach the cattle. Only the secondary pipe near the barn. Enough to make a mess, not a disaster. But the message was clear. Sabotage, not strategy. She was running out of moves and trying to make the ground burn under our feet. I spent the night walking the perimeter, lantern in one hand, dog at my heel. Every shadow looked like a threat. Every gust of wind felt like it carried intent. My wife watched from the porch, shotgun across her lap, not loaded, just a symbol. That's all we had left between us and chaos now. Symbols, grit, and the thin line between law and war. Morning came with silence, the kind that makes your teeth itch. We drank bitter coffee and said nothing. Just waited. It felt like standing on a frozen lake, listening for the crack. And then it came, a call from Carla at the community center. Breathless, angry. Karen filed an injunction against the fire route. She's petitioning to have it reclassified as dormant, not active. I nearly dropped the mug. She says it hasn't been used for emergencies in 20 years. Claims it's irrelevant. She submitted the petition directly to the state. I didn't speak for a beat, just breathed. Then I said, "That's not ignorance. That's arson with paperwork." We had no time to waste. My wife and I loaded up everything. Maps, photos, historic overlays, Hector's notes, the memo copies, even that binder from Carla, and drove straight to the regional state office. 3 counties away, 5 hours round trip. No calls, no emails, just paper. Physical presence. Proof they couldn't ignore. The state official, a woman named Simmons, took one look at the documents and said, "Why didn't you bring this sooner?" We weren't loud enough yet, I said. She frowned. "I'll escalate it. But if the petition gets accepted before we respond, it'll take months to reverse." I nodded. "Then we need a reason for them to freeze it now." She thought for a long moment, then said, "If it can be demonstrated that the route is still in use or needed for safety." That's all I needed to hear. We drove home in silence, gears grinding in my head. That night, I stood at the fire post near the ridge and stared down the old route. Then I made 3 calls, one to the volunteer fire department, one to Hector, one to a friend in the forestry service. The next morning, a controlled burn, routine, scheduled, was announced for the state forest 2 miles south of us. Fire break lines were needed. Routes scouted. Evacuation potential discussed. My wife, back in uniform, filed a safety memo. Reinstate visual inspection of ridge evacuation route. Yishdi. Just like that, it became active again. Karen's petition lost its footing, but retaliation came fast. That afternoon, the association truck showed up. 3 board members inside. No Karen. They didn't step out. Just left a sealed letter in our mailbox, then turned around. Inside. Notice of violation? False. Technical. Excessive use of non-compliant fencing. They were trying to bury us in rules. But the funny thing is, rules work both ways. I went back to that 1996 case file. Buried inside, a clause Karen had personally signed as then-assistant secretary. It declared all non-subdivision parcels exempt from regulatory expansion unless individually incorporated by owner consent. It had never been overturned. She signed her own noose. The next day, I printed it, highlighted her signature. Then I did something I never thought I'd do. I went to the homeowner association office. Alone. They weren't expecting me. The receptionist froze. I asked for Karen. Got a blank stare. She's unavailable. So I handed her the file and said, "Give her this. Tell her the land remembers what people forget." I walked out into the sun, lighter than I'd felt in weeks. But peace wasn't coming yet. That night, my wife got a call from her station. Anonymous tip, misconduct, evidence tampering. A file linked to one of her old cases had gone missing. She stared at the phone for a long time. Then she said, "They're trying to bury me in shadows." I looked at her and said, "Then it's time we turned on the floodlights." And I knew exactly how. Karen loved control, but she hated exposure. So I built a trap. Not with bait, with pressure. I made a request under the state's Open Records Act for all HOA communications related to land acquisition, safety planning, and incident reporting. If they refused, that was a violation. If they complied, the truth would bleed out. And either way, we'd be waiting. Waiting is its own kind of battle, especially when you know the enemy is cornered, bleeding pride and doubling down. The days that followed the record's request were quiet, but not clean. Quiet like the deep inhale before a scream. On Tuesday, I got a call from the county clerk. She said the homeowner association had filed a counterclaim against me and my wife. Something about willful obstruction of communal planning initiatives. She sounded embarrassed, even reading it out loud. "I just thought you should know," she said, "because it's not coming through the sheriff's office." Of course not. Karen knew better. She was trying to stack paper. Hope the weight alone would crush us. What she didn't know was that the paper had turned against her. 2 days after I filed the open records request, I got a call back from Simmons at the state office. Her voice was tight, professional, but I could hear the heat underneath. Your request triggered a document dump," she said. "A lot of files, hundreds. But there's one you need to see first. We're overnighting it." It arrived next morning. Sealed envelope. State letterhead inside. An internal HOA briefing memo labeled confidential. Dated 6 months prior. In it, Karen detailed a phased acquisition strategy that included selective targeting of non-integrated parcels, outlined methods for community pressure, and here's the real gut punch, a reference to the sheriff's department as a manageable obstacle. My wife read it 3 times. Then again. She didn't cry. She didn't shout. She just whispered. She planned the complaint months before we ever spoke to her. That was the moment something shifted. She stood, put on her uniform, and clipped her badge with deliberate slowness. "She's not just attacking our land. She's attacking my oath." I nodded. "Let's return the favor." We didn't go to the HOA office. We went to the regional FEMA substation. The Ridge Evacuation Route had always been part of the emergency wildfire plan. Always. Until Karen decided to choke it with red tape. What she hadn't counted on was the fact that interfering with designated emergency routes, especially during active fire season, triggered federal oversight. We submitted every document, every memo, every diagram, and then we waited. Again. But the waiting didn't last long. 2 days later, the ridge got hit by a lightning storm. No fire, thank God. Just a power outage. Trees down, minor flooding, but it was enough. The local news ran a piece on emergency preparedness. Routine coverage. But a friend of ours at the station, former Army buddy of my wife, slipped them a quiet tip. The broadcast cut to aerial footage of the ridge. Overlaid on screen. A red line tracing the blocked evacuation route. No names, no drama, just facts. It was enough. That evening, 2 HOA board members called for a private meeting. Said they wanted to speak off the record. We met at the feed store. Back room. Dusty light through slatted blinds. They looked tired, nervous. One of them, a man named Cray, finally spoke. We didn't know about the memo. We didn't approve that language. We just thought it was about keeping things tidy, organized. My wife didn't blink. She tried to destroy my career, my marriage, our home. I know, he said. And that's why we're here. They handed us a folder. Inside, minutes from HOA internal meetings. Several with redacted comments from Karen herself. But in one, she slipped. A comment referencing leveraging power over uncooperative residents using all enforcement tools, including law enforcement. She hadn't just planned to neutralize us. She'd planned to use my wife's badge against her. My wife looked at me. We take this to Simmons? I shook my head. We go bigger. That night, we drove to the city, checked into a cheap motel, used a burner laptop, created a secure Dropbox with every document, every map, every file, tagged, time-stamped, cross-indexed. We didn't blast it to the public. We sent it to every HOA board member, every county official, every state emergency planner we could find. No threats, no statements, just the truth. And then we waited. That waiting felt different. Not like dread, like the kind of silence before a dam gives out. The next morning, Karen didn't show up to the HOA office. By noon, the locks were changed. By evening, her Lexus was gone. But we weren't done yet, because now came the part she feared most. We weren't going to exile her. We were going to make her irrelevant. And that would hurt worse than any verdict. You don't beat people like Karen by shouting louder. You beat them by making the room go quiet when they speak. And that silence? That's exactly what followed her disappearance. The HOA board didn't issue a statement. They didn't need to. People noticed the locks changed, noticed the Lexus gone, noticed the emails stop coming, and just like that, the power she'd clung to gripped so tight she left claw marks, slipped through her fingers. But we weren't there to celebrate. We were still cleaning up. Our water line had to be replaced, fencing repaired. We lost weeks of grazing rotation, and my wife still had to sit through internal reviews, file by file, proving that every action she took was above board. They didn't say it, but I knew what they were looking for. Any excuse to call her a problem. She gave them nothing, and I gave them patience, because sometimes victory doesn't feel like a parade. It feels like sweat, dirt, and paperwork. But something changed in town. At the feed store, folks stopped avoiding eye contact. A couple even nodded. One left a box of donuts on our tailgate. No note, no name, but it meant something. Even Carla, who once said she didn't want to get involved, dropped off a stack of archived maps with a sticky note. Just in case. Then came the letter. It arrived by courier. Thick envelope, gold seal, from the state. Inside, an official notice that the Ridge Evacuation Corridor had been fully reinstated as protected emergency infrastructure. Designated permanent. Immune from private acquisition. I handed it to my wife. She read it once. Then again. Then she folded it carefully, set it on the table, and walked outside. I followed. She stood at the fence line, staring out over the field. The dog sat beside her, quiet. After a while, she said, You know what hurts the most? What? She didn't care about the land, not once. She never looked at it, never walked it. She just saw shapes on a map. I nodded. Some people only see territory. Others see home. She turned to me. So what now? I smiled. Now we build something she can't touch, EO. And we did. The next few weeks were full of movement. Quiet, steady progress. We partnered with the fire department to set up a training post along the route. Simple, visible, legal. My wife helped draft an emergency readiness plan that got adopted by 2 neighboring counties. We put a sign up at the entrance of the route. Nothing dramatic. Just a wooden post carved by hand. Ridge. Escape. Way. For those who remember. But the final piece? That was hers. My wife applied to start a volunteer ranger program. Rural patrol liaisons who could monitor and report conditions along the corridor. Not enforcement. Just eyes. Presence. They approved it in a week. She asked me if I'd be the first volunteer. I said yes. Meanwhile, Karen resurfaced. Not dramatically, not with flames or threats. She took a new job 2 counties over. Some consultant position. No title, no spotlight. Someone asked me if I was going to warn them. I said no, because some lessons don't come from being stopped. They come from being left behind. One morning, a car pulled into our driveway. Not Karen. A young man in a suit. Nervous hands. He said he represented the HOA's new interim director. Offered us a formal apology and a written declaration that our property would never be considered for future annexation. I took the letter, read it, then handed it back. Tell your boss I don't need permission to stay on land that's already mine. He nodded. Didn't argue. Just got back in the car and left. My wife watched from the porch. You think that's the end? She asked. No, I said. That's the start. Because what we'd done wasn't just about one fight. It was about drawing a line that people like Karen couldn't cross again, and making sure the land remembered who actually lived there. And then, as if on cue, the wind picked up. Dry and cool, sliding across the hills, carrying no smoke this time. Just the smell of grass and dust and the sound of something ending. Or maybe, finally, something beginning. The thing about endings is they rarely announce themselves. There's no grand finale, no fireworks over the pasture. Just a slow shift in how the wind sounds when it brushes the eaves, how the gravel crunches under your boots, how your wife starts humming again when she makes coffee. Weeks passed. Not much changed, and that was the best part. The fence stayed up. The gate stayed open. The calls stopped coming. The letters too. My wife returned fully to duty. No whispers, no questions. Just nods, paperwork, and long drives down county roads. She never mentioned Karen again. Didn't need to. She'd beaten her by surviving her. I started carving again. I used to make small things. Tools, rails, the occasional stool. But I found myself drawn to bigger shapes now. Things meant to last. I began working on a bench made from the oak tree Karen had tried to declare diseased, the one we saved. I shaped it by hand. No stain, no polish. Just the grain and the truth. One morning, I placed it near the sign on the ridge route. My wife helped me bolt it down. We didn't say anything while we worked, but when it was done, she sat. Looked out across the dry line of grass. Then she smiled. Not a big one, not loud, but real. After a while, she said, Think she'll ever come back? I shrugged. Doesn't matter. Because the door was gone. We didn't leave room for people like that anymore. The new HOA director, some young woman named Ellis, sent another letter. This one, softer. She asked if we'd consider consulting on a new community safety plan. My wife read it over, then laughed. Let them draw their own maps, she said. We've got fences to fix. She handed me the letter and walked out with the dog, already calling to the horses. I burned it later, watching the corners curl into black, and still the land remained. It rained twice in September, enough to wake the green under the dust. I planted new grass along the old fire corridor. Not because I had to, because I wanted to. Every morning, I walked it. Not to check for damage, just to feel the air. Sometimes I brought coffee. Sometimes just myself. And sometimes I'd pass others doing the same. Old Jim, Carla, even the new fire chief from 2 towns over. Nobody talked much, but they waved, nodded. The kind of respect that isn't spoken. It's earned. One morning, I found something tucked under the ridge escape sign. A small wooden plaque. No name. Just a carving. For those who stood still while others ran. My wife stood beside me as I read it. She said nothing. But she reached over, took my hand, and held it. And that was enough. Later that season, the state announced a new grant program. Landowner-led safety corridors. Volunteer-maintained. County-monitored. Ours was the first listed. We didn't apply for credit, but they used our map. Sometimes I think about Karen. Not often. Just in flashes. Her standing at the edge of our gravel, sunglasses hiding the panic. Her voice trembling behind bureaucratic armor. A queen without a court. She lost the moment she thought the badge on my wife's hip was just another tool to exploit. She lost when she thought land was power, not memory. And we? We won the day we stopped playing her game, because the land doesn't keep score, but it remembers who walked it with care, and it forgets those who tried to own what they never understood. That's the story. Not loud, not clean, but ours. And if you ever find yourself driving through our hills, past the split fence and the crooked mailbox, with our name barely hanging on, stop. Take the turn. You'll find a quiet road, a simple sign, and a bench that wasn't always there. Sit. Breathe. And remember, some things are worth standing for, even if you have to do it alone, especially then.